When two princesses united, even the oldest galactic laws began to break. She lived in a city made of shining crystals that reflected the light of three suns, with floating gardens that drifted gently above the city streets. Her life was full of learning, invention, and careful study, but something in her heart longed for more than the walls of her crystal palace. She would often sneak to the tallest tower, climb to the very edge where the wind danced with her hair, and look at the endless space beyond her world. In her mind, the universe was a puzzle waiting to be understood, a place full of mysteries and possibilities, and she was determined to find them. Far away, on the green planet of Verdantes, Princess Myra wandered through forests that seemed alive. Trees whispered softly in the wind, flowers turned their heads as she passed, and streams sang songs that only she could hear. Myra had a gift. She could communicate with the living world around her. Verdantes was a planet that had never known war, but it had known isolation. Its people had followed the rules of the galaxy carefully, keeping to themselves and avoiding interference with other planets. Myra often wondered what lay beyond the floating lakes and vast forests. She imagined other worlds filled with creatures, inventions, and ideas she could hardly dream of. The galaxy was governed by laws older than memory, laws that dictated which planets could trade with each other, who could visit where, and even how planets could interact. Some of these laws were designed to protect weaker worlds from stronger ones. Others were created to prevent conflicts that had never really happened. For centuries, these rules were obeyed without question, until the announcement came that changed everything: the Century Festival at the neutral space station of Orion. Orion floated in the blackness between galaxies, a magnificent station shaped like a spinning ring with sparkling lights that mimicked stars. It was a place of diplomacy, learning, and rare celebration, and it appeared only once every 100 years. Invitations were sent to rulers, scholars, and those with a curiosity beyond the limits of their own worlds. When Alara received her invitation, she felt a thrill she had never known. This was a chance to see the universe in a way no Lunaran had ever seen before. She packed her inventions carefully, preparing small devices to study the stars, capture cosmic energy, and communicate across distances. Myra, too, was intrigued by the festival. Verdantes had rarely sent representatives to distant planets, and she was chosen not only for her wisdom, but because of her natural empathy and ability to connect with others. She brought with her samples of her planet's plants and seeds, hoping to share the living beauty of Verdantes with the galaxy. Her heart raced as her ship approached Orion. She had heard stories of the festival, magnificent displays, dazzling technologies, and creatures from places she could not even imagine. The first time Alara and Myra met, it was by accident. Alara's attention was caught by a glowing light near one of the observation decks, and when she followed it, she found Myra gently placing a small, glowing seed into a vessel of water. The seed shimmered, pulsing with life as if it were speaking directly to Myra. Alara's eyes widened with curiosity, and she could not help but ask, "What is that?" Myra looked up, smiling warmly. "It's a seed from Verdantes. It grows in water and air at the same time. I wanted to see if it could survive in space." Alara's mind raced. "That's incredible. I've never seen anything like it. May I study it with you?" From that moment, the two princesses were inseparable. They moved together through Orion, exploring every exhibit, learning about technologies, histories, and creatures from countless worlds. They laughed at the strange behaviors of alien animals, marveled at inventions that defied gravity, and shared stories of their own homes. Alara taught Myra how to calibrate a star mapper device, while Myra showed Alara how to communicate with living things in ways she had never imagined. On the third day of the festival, as they wandered through a forgotten corridor of the station, they stumbled upon something extraordinary, an artifact lying alone in a small chamber. It was a crystal orb that glowed softly, inscribed with patterns that seemed to shift as they watched. A small plaque nearby bore a warning in an ancient language, one that neither princess fully understood, yet somehow they could feel the words in their minds. "Heed unity, for laws are alive and old, and even the smallest touch can awaken change." The artifact pulsed as they approached. Alara reached out her hand, trembling slightly. Myra did the same. When their fingers touched the crystal together, a wave of warmth and light spread through the room. The artifact began to hum softly, and visions appeared before them. Planets once divided by distance now connected by glowing threads, creatures sharing knowledge, cities flourishing in unexpected ways. Neither of them spoke at first. They only watched, awestruck. What is happening?" Myra whispered. Alara's eyes shone. "I think it's showing us what could be. The galaxy doesn't have to be divided. Maybe the laws, maybe they're meant to change." They studied the artifact for hours, learning to understand its energy. Every new discovery brought them closer, their minds aligned in thought and imagination. They began to plan. Perhaps they could find ways to test this vision without breaking anything dangerously. Perhaps the galaxy could be better, kinder, more connected. The festival continued around them, but they were no longer merely visitors. Their thoughts turned to ideas, and their hearts were united by a shared mission. They explored Orion's libraries, reading scrolls and databases about the oldest galactic laws. Some laws forbade planets from sharing technology, others forbade direct communication without permission. They realized that while these laws had preserved order, they had also prevented progress. They began to see that curiosity, kindness, and cooperation might achieve more than fear or strict obedience. Evening came, and the station's lights dimmed to mimic a sunset in space. The two princesses floated above the observation deck, their hands resting lightly on the rail, looking out at the endless stars. Alara spoke first, her voice soft. "Myra, I feel like, if we work together, we can do something no one has ever done before." Myra smiled, her eyes reflecting the glow of distant suns. "I feel it too, and not just for us, for everyone. Maybe the galaxy needs two princesses who are willing to imagine differently." That night, they stayed awake talking about the possibilities. They dreamed of gardens that floated between worlds, of knowledge shared freely, of beings working together across planets. They imagined a future where the oldest laws would no longer limit the universe, but guide it gently toward unity and understanding. By the time the festival ended, something fundamental had changed. The artifact had imprinted a vision upon their hearts, a vision of cooperation and growth. And although they returned to their respective planets, their connection remained unbroken. Letters and messages traveled faster than ever before, carrying sketches, diagrams, and ideas. The distance between Lunara and Verdantes seemed smaller each day, not because of technology alone, but because the two princesses had united in thought and purpose. The galaxy itself seemed to notice. Small changes began to ripple outward. An alien trade route reopened, a rare plant shared between planets, a once-forbidden conversation allowed in council halls. The oldest laws, rigid and unyielding for centuries, had started to feel the gentle pressure of something new. The universe, vast and complex, had begun to respond to the courage and curiosity of two young women who dared to imagine differently. And so, as Part 1 closes, Princess Alara and Princess Myra had met, discovered the artifact, and united their hearts and minds. They had taken the first step toward a galaxy that could change without chaos, toward a future where curiosity, compassion, and cooperation were stronger than fear or tradition. The journey had only just begun, but already even the oldest galactic laws had begun to bend, waiting for the next step the princesses would take together. The days after the festival passed quickly for Princess Alara and Princess Myra, yet neither of them felt the passage of time in the usual way. Though separated by countless light years, their minds remained connected by letters, messages, and shared ideas. Every morning, Alara would rise in the crystal towers of Lunara and check her communication console for a new message from Myra. Every evening, Myra would walk through the forests of Verdantes and touch her communicator to feel the presence of Alara's thoughts. The galaxy, which had once seemed vast and unapproachable, now felt smaller, more alive, more full of possibility. The first message Alara received from Myra was not a greeting, but a question. It asked how the seed had fared after being moved from the festival chamber to a small growing dome aboard Alara's ship. Myra described how it glimmered even more brightly in Lunara's artificial sunlight, and she suggested ideas for ways to make it grow faster and healthier. Alara replied with sketches of a system that could simulate the water and air balance of Verdantes, creating the perfect environment for the plant to thrive. In this simple exchange, they were already combining the strengths of their worlds, Alara's inventions and Myra's knowledge of life. They decided that the next step was to see if the artifact itself could guide them. Though the ancient device had been returned to the stars, the vision it left behind remained clear in their minds. They could see threads of connection stretching across the galaxy, linking worlds that had never spoken to each other, weaving possibilities for cooperation and understanding. The princesses agreed that they would begin small, testing the idea on planets that were ready to listen. Alara started by sending small packets of Lunara's technology to neighboring planets. Devices that cleaned water, devices that produced energy from starlight, and simple tools that could help farmers in distant worlds. She packaged them carefully, ensuring that no law was broken by her actions. Meanwhile, Myra sent seeds and plants from Verdantes, some with unusual properties. Flowers that glowed softly to indicate the presence of nearby water, vines that could purify the air, and trees whose roots could stabilize unstable soil. They did not know if these gifts would be welcomed, but they hoped that curiosity and goodwill would be enough. Their first success came sooner than they expected. On a small desert planet called Zareth, farmers had struggled for generations to grow enough food. When they received Alara's energy-capturing devices and Myra's glowing seeds, the results were astonishing. Fields that had once been barren began to flourish, and clean water appeared in streams where there had been none. The farmers did not know who had sent the gifts, but they were grateful and amazed. Reports of these small miracles quickly traveled through communication networks, drawing the attention of nearby planets. Not all responses were immediate or enthusiastic. Some worlds were skeptical. Councils argued over whether accepting these gifts would violate galactic rules. Others worried that the devices might harm their own traditions or culture. Alara and Myra learned that change, even when beneficial, was never simple. They wrote letters to the leaders, explaining the principles behind their inventions, showing how cooperation could benefit everyone without taking away autonomy or identity. Slowly, some councils began to listen, curious about the possibilities. The princesses' partnership was tested during one important conference held on a neutral space platform between Lunara and Verdantes. Leaders from neighboring systems gathered to discuss recent events, and both Alara and Myra were invited to speak. Alara explained the devices and how they could support local communities. Myra spoke of the plants and their benefits to life and health. At first, there was hesitation, whispers among the council members, doubts about whether two young princesses could influence galactic systems. But the more they spoke, the more their sincerity shone through. Their words were not demands or threats. They were visions of a galaxy where knowledge and resources could be shared without fear or loss. By the end of the conference, the council agreed to a trial program. Selected planets would receive support from Lunara and Verdantes in controlled ways, allowing them to test the ideas and report results. The princesses felt a surge of hope. This was the first time in centuries that the galaxy had taken steps toward cooperation without conflict, and they were at the center of it. As their influence grew, the oldest laws of the galaxy began to show cracks, though not in destructive ways. The rules that had separated planets were written for safety, yet their rigidity had limited potential. For example, a law forbade sharing knowledge between technologically advanced planets and less advanced worlds, fearing that imbalance could cause chaos. Yet when Alara and Myra facilitated the safe sharing of inventions, both advanced and developing planets benefited. Crops flourished, clean water appeared where it was scarce, and energy shortages disappeared in some regions. The galaxy was proving that laws were not fixed. They were a guide, flexible when handled with care. One evening, as Alara worked in her laboratory adjusting a star mapper device, Myra sent her a message that made her laugh out loud. "Do you know," Myra wrote, "that a small planet near the edge of the Andara belt has started building bridges out of your energy threads, connecting floating islands? They say your gift made it possible to hold their cities together." Alara replied quickly, excitement shining in her words. "I had no idea it would work that way. That is incredible. We need to observe this. Maybe it can teach us how energy can be shared safely across entire planets." The two princesses began to notice patterns. When they combined technology and life, when they connected communities with patience and understanding, the results multiplied. What began as small gifts became projects. Water systems linking arid planets, floating gardens providing both food and beauty, communication hubs enabling learning across galaxies. The energy of cooperation spread, slowly at first, then more quickly as more worlds observed the success of others. Even the elder councils who had initially opposed change began to send cautious reports. Some admitted that what they had feared as danger was instead a glimpse of potential. Ancient maps of trade routes were redrawn, not by force, but by curiosity and goodwill. Councils debated and adapted, showing that even the oldest traditions could bend when guided by logic and empathy rather than fear. Throughout these changes, Alara and Myra's friendship deepened. They were not merely partners in work. They had become a shared mind, a team whose strengths complemented each other perfectly. Alara's inventiveness paired with Myra's understanding of living systems produced solutions no one could have predicted. They laughed together at mistakes, celebrated small victories, and sometimes just shared quiet moments, staring at the stars and imagining what more could be done. One day, while observing a planet called Selira, where a river had long been polluted, the princesses discovered a way to purify it using a combination of Lunaran filters and Verdante's plant systems. When the river ran clean for the first time in centuries, the citizens gathered to celebrate. Children played in the water and elders wept with relief and joy. Alara turned to Myra, smiling. "We didn't just make a river clean, we gave them hope." Myra nodded. "Yes, and hope spreads faster than water or energy. Soon, other planets will see this and try it themselves. Change is not about breaking rules. It's about showing what is possible when hearts and minds work together." Despite their success, the princesses understood the importance of care. Not every planet could be helped at once, and not every change would be immediately accepted. They continued to plan, test, and communicate, learning from mistakes and observing how the galaxy reacted. Their vision was not a sudden revolution, but a slow, deliberate transformation, one that respected every culture and every law while gently guiding them toward cooperation. During one particularly memorable exchange, a small planet called Thrynia resisted all their offers. Its council feared losing control if they accepted outside help. Alara and Myra decided to visit in person. They walked among the citizens, listening to their stories, watching children play, and sharing meals in local homes. They did not lecture or command, they simply showed what was possible. Over weeks, the people began to trust them. Slowly, the council agreed to a pilot project. When crops thrived and water flowed again, the council embraced the changes fully. This was the moment the princesses realized that true change came from connection, not authority. By the end of the year, the effects of their efforts were visible across multiple star systems. Planets that had once been isolated were communicating, sharing resources, and experimenting with new ideas. The threads of connection first seen in the artifact's vision were becoming reality. Even the oldest galactic laws, which had seemed permanent, had begun to bend under the influence of understanding, compassion, and cleverness. In private messages, the princesses shared their amazement. Alara wrote, "It feels like the galaxy itself is alive, reacting to what we do. Every time we help, every time we connect, it hums with possibility." Myra responded, "Yes, and it is showing us something very important. Laws are not just rules, they are reflections of our choices. If we choose wisely, we can guide them toward life, not limit it." As part 2 of their journey concluded, Princess Alara and Princess Myra had proven that cooperation could succeed even in the face of centuries-old tradition. They had seen the first ripple effects of their unity, tested their ideas in the real world, and inspired hope in planets that had long given up on change. Their mission was far from complete, but the galaxy itself had already begun to feel different, brighter, more open, and full of possibility. The princesses had discovered that when courage, curiosity, and care came together, even the oldest galactic laws could begin to bend, preparing the universe for the next stage of transformation. The galaxy had begun to change, and Princess Alara and Princess Myra could feel it in every message, every report, and every new discovery. The threads of connection they had started in Part 2 were spreading faster than either of them could have imagined. Planets that had once been isolated were reaching out to each other, sharing ideas, learning from mistakes, and celebrating small victories. Yet the princesses knew that change on this scale was never simple. They would have to guide it carefully, with patience, intelligence, and understanding. It began with trade and knowledge. On a planet called Savara, located near the outer edge of the Saphira cluster, artisans had struggled to produce enough materials to sustain their crafts. They had the skill, but not the resources. When Alara and Myra's systems of cooperation reached Savara, the artisans were introduced to Lunara's lightweight energy tools and verdantes, hardy plant-based materials. Initially, the artisans were skeptical, fearing that foreign methods might erase their traditional techniques. Alara and Myra arrived personally, presenting the gifts not as a replacement but as a collaboration. "These tools will not take away your traditions," Alara explained. "They will help you express them more fully. You will still decide what to create," Myra added. "And these plants are alive. They will work with you, not for you. They will listen just as we have listened to your needs." The artisans experimented cautiously. To their surprise, the new tools allowed them to craft intricate designs they had never attempted before. The plant-based materials integrated seamlessly, expanding the possibilities for decoration, construction, and everyday life. Within weeks, Savara became a hub of creativity, drawing visitors from neighboring planets to witness the fusion of tradition and innovation. The Council of Savara sent a formal message to Lunara and Verdantes, praising the princesses for their careful and thoughtful approach. Meanwhile, other planets were experiencing subtler changes. On the desert world of Kelara, previously ignored rivers began to flourish as Myra's plants purified water, while Alara's devices redistributed it efficiently. Children played where dry dust had once been the only ground. Elders shared stories with visitors who had never before seen the river alive. Simple acts, combined with careful guidance, were creating harmony across planets. The princesses' partnership had deepened further. They spent months coordinating projects, sending messages filled with sketches, diagrams, and observations. They celebrated small victories: a floating garden that could move between two cities on different planets, a network of communication beacons allowing distant scholars to share ideas instantly, and even festivals that could be coordinated across multiple worlds simultaneously. Every achievement reinforced their belief that cooperation and unity could thrive without conflict or coercion. However, not all progress was smooth. The oldest laws of the galaxy, while bending in some areas, still resisted in others. Some councils were hesitant to acknowledge the changes. They feared that if they allowed cooperation, other planets might gain advantages unfairly. The princesses understood these concerns. They did not impose solutions, but instead invited dialogue. They created forums in neutral space, where representatives could discuss possibilities, share successes, and learn from failures. Through these forums, trust grew slowly but steadily. One forum, held in the floating city of Orion Minor, was especially memorable. Representatives from over 20 planets attended. Alara demonstrated a system that allowed energy from one planet to power homes on another. Myra shared a plant that could purify polluted air in city environments. The representatives were amazed. Questions flowed, debates sparked, and finally agreements were reached on pilot programs for several planets. Alara and Myra's ability to listen and respond set them apart from previous rulers. They never dismissed concerns, never demanded obedience. They showed respect for every culture, every tradition, and every law. Slowly, planets began to adopt the idea that laws were not rigid chains, but guides for safety, capable of being adapted with care and understanding. The ripple effect spread further than the princesses anticipated. In the Valera star cluster, artists began creating works that represented unity. Murals connecting multiple cities on different planets, music composed collaboratively by musicians who had never met in person, and gardens designed to grow in sync across worlds. News of these creative projects traveled rapidly, inspiring other systems to try similar experiments. Even planets that had resisted initially began to reconsider. Alara and Myra also faced challenges that tested their creativity. On a planet called Dravara, technological and natural systems conflicted. Alara's machines were efficient but cold, while Myra's plants were organic and unpredictable. When combined improperly, they caused small mishaps, such as energy surges and water shortages. Rather than assigning blame, the princesses worked together to understand the interactions. They discovered that each system needed to be tuned to the other, a lesson that became a guiding principle for future projects. Balance between innovation and nature, logic and life, was essential. This lesson was not limited to technology. Social dynamics were equally complex. Some communities feared the changes because they worried about losing their identity or autonomy. Alara and Myra approached these situations with care. They arranged for delegates to visit other planets where cooperation had succeeded, allowing them to see firsthand the benefits without pressure or coercion. People began to understand that embracing new ideas did not mean abandoning their heritage. As their influence grew, so did the attention of the galaxy's elders. The oldest councils, who had once warned against change, now watched with curiosity. They were not yet fully convinced, but they could not deny the evidence before them. Planets were thriving, relationships were strengthening, and resources were being shared responsibly. One elder of the Galactic Council of Law, a wise figure who had ruled for centuries, remarked privately, "Perhaps the galaxy has needed this for longer than we realized. These two young princesses see what we could not." Alara and Myra also discovered the joy of teaching. They began mentoring young leaders, inventors, and caretakers across the galaxy. They shared not only tools and techniques, but also the principles of cooperation, empathy, and observation. Young leaders learned that leadership was not about power, but about responsibility, creativity, and vision. In one memorable moment, a group of students from multiple planets created a floating observatory, combining Lunara's technology with Verdante's living structures. The observatory allowed planets to monitor each other's ecosystems, share research on stars and energy, and collaborate on environmental projects. The princesses watched proudly as the students took initiative, knowing that the seeds of unity they had planted were taking root in the next generation. Even as success grew, the princesses remained humble. They celebrated the small victories as much as the large ones, understanding that true progress was gradual. They spent nights gazing at the stars, imagining possibilities for worlds that had never been visited, lives that had never been touched, and systems that had never spoken. Their visions were bold, yet carefully considered, always grounded in respect for life and law. Their friendship remained the core of their efforts. Alara's inventiveness complemented Myra's empathy. When Alara imagined a new device or system, Myra considered how it would affect living beings and ecosystems. When Myra envisioned a plant or organism, Alara devised ways to implement it safely and efficiently. Together, they discovered that creativity multiplied when combined with understanding. The galaxy itself seemed to respond. Reports began to emerge of planets adjusting naturally to new connections. Trade became more fluid, environmental systems balanced more effectively, and communication networks allowed knowledge to flow freely. Alara and Myra noticed that even some ancient laws were beginning to shift on their own. Rules that had been rigid for centuries were quietly being rewritten to accommodate collaboration rather than separation. One evening, as the two princesses floated in the observation dome of Orion, watching countless stars twinkle across the darkness of space, Myra said, "Do you realize what we're doing? This isn't just helping planets. We're showing the galaxy that change can be gentle, that rules can bend without breaking, and that life can thrive together." Alara smiled, adjusting a small star map. "Yes, and the best part is it's not just us. Everyone who sees the benefits, everyone who tries new things, they're part of it too. The galaxy itself is learning." As Part 3 drew to a close, the ripple effects of the princesses' efforts were clear. Planets once isolated were connecting, knowledge was spreading freely, and the oldest galactic laws were adapting under the careful guidance of two courageous young women. The galaxy was beginning to resemble the vision the artifact had shown them long ago. A network of cooperation, creativity, and understanding, all guided by curiosity and compassion. Alara and Myra had learned that true leadership was not about imposing rules or enforcing obedience. It was about listening, guiding, inspiring, and connecting. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that the next stage of their journey would be even more transformative, a time when even the most distant and rigid systems might embrace change, and when the galaxy itself would begin to hum with the possibilities of unity. The galaxy had changed more than anyone could have imagined. The seeds planted by Princess Alara and Princess Myra had grown into networks of cooperation, understanding, and creativity. Trade routes that had once been empty now bustled with ideas, energy, and life. Planets that had been isolated and cautious were now connected, sharing discoveries, art, and innovations. Even the oldest galactic laws, once rigid and unyielding, had begun to bend to the rhythms of a universe that was learning to work together. Alara and Myra had grown alongside these changes. Their partnership had become legendary, not because of power, but because of vision, empathy, and courage. They no longer traveled as solitary rulers. They traveled as ambassadors of unity, bringing guidance to worlds that were ready and inspiration to those still hesitant. Their presence alone encouraged communities to cooperate, showing that change could be gentle and kind, not forced or sudden. On the planet of Lyrana, one of the oldest and most traditional worlds in the galaxy, their influence became most apparent. Lyrana's cities were built in rigid patterns, its people careful to follow every law written in the Galactic Code. The Council had always resisted outside ideas, believing that their traditions preserved stability. But when Alara and Myra arrived, they brought no demands, no orders, only demonstrations. They shared floating gardens that worked with Lyrana's natural sunlight, allowing communities to grow food without harming the environment. They displayed energy networks that powered entire cities with minimal waste. They taught the people of Lyrana to work together, showing that innovation could enhance, not replace, tradition. At first, the Council resisted. Old laws still weighed heavily on their decisions. Yet the citizens saw the benefits immediately. Children played in parks lit by soft, sustainable energy. Elders marveled at gardens that grew in places where no soil had existed before. Artisans discovered materials and tools that allowed them to express their culture in new ways. Slowly, the Council began to accept what the princesses had already proven, that cooperation could exist within tradition, that rules could bend without being broken. In another part of the galaxy, the Saphira cluster, once divided by suspicion and distance, became a hub of collaboration. Scientists from different planets shared data on stars, energy, and ecosystems. Musicians composed symphonies that could be performed simultaneously on multiple worlds. Artists designed public spaces that could be enjoyed by travelers from other planets. Children who had never met before played together across virtual and physical spaces, learning empathy, creativity, and curiosity. Alara and Myra guided these efforts with care. They did not dictate how planets should use the tools they provided. They observed, advised, and offered suggestions, always allowing local leaders to make decisions. In this way, they ensured that every community felt ownership of the change. The princesses had learned that lasting progress could only come when people chose to participate willingly, not when they were forced to obey. Even the oldest galactic laws, which had once seemed permanent, were now adapting. Laws that forbade interplanetary alliances without council approval were being rewritten to allow voluntary cooperation. Rules that limited the sharing of technology were modified to encourage safe and responsible collaboration. These changes were not enforced. They were inspired by example. The princesses had shown that it was possible to respect tradition while still embracing the benefits of connection. In the Velera star cluster, one of the more artistic regions, a festival was held to celebrate the new era. Planets from across the galaxy sent representatives, and the event was organized entirely through the networks Alara and Myra had helped create. Music filled the skies, light displays danced among the stars, and gardens floated gracefully between platforms, suspended by energy fields. Artists displayed sculptures that incorporated both Lunaran crystal and Verdante's living plants. People laughed, shared ideas, and marveled at the beauty of collaboration. The festival became a symbol of the galaxy's potential, demonstrating what could be achieved when unity, creativity, and empathy guided action. Even planets that had resisted initially were transformed by witnessing these celebrations. On Thrynia, which had once refused outside help, citizens now volunteered to assist neighboring worlds, sharing their knowledge and resources. On Zareth, which had first benefited from Alara's devices and Myra's plants, communities were mentoring others, showing that progress could be shared, not hoarded. The ripple effect was stronger than ever, spreading across stars and systems like light across the dark void of space. The princesses continued their work tirelessly. Alara refined devices that could harness energy from stars, distributing it where it was most needed. Myra nurtured plants capable of restoring polluted lands, purifying water, and even stabilizing weather patterns in challenging climates. Together, they combined these tools to create living systems that supported both life and technology. The galaxy was learning that cooperation was not a risk, but a source of strength. Yet they also faced subtle challenges. Some planets struggled with adaptation, needing time to trust the changes. Some species were wary of interactions outside their home worlds. Ilara and Myra responded with patience, arranging exchange programs, workshops, and collaborative projects that allowed participants to learn safely. Their approach was never about speed or efficiency alone. It was about understanding, empathy, and respect for diversity. One day, while observing the Orion Nebula, the princesses received a message from the council of the oldest planet in the galaxy, Zalaris. For centuries, Zalaris had resisted all external influence. Its leaders were bound by the oldest laws, its people careful to follow every rule. The message was unexpected. They invited the princesses to visit and share their methods. This invitation alone was a milestone. It signaled that even the most cautious worlds were ready to consider cooperation, guided by example rather than fear. The journey to Zalaris was long, spanning countless star systems. The princesses traveled together, discussing plans and imagining ways to demonstrate their principles without overwhelming the planet's traditions. When they arrived, they were greeted not by skeptics, but by curious citizens. Ilara and Myra presented projects that integrated Zalaris, existing systems with small, safe innovations. They showed energy networks that preserved the planet's natural cycles, gardens that flourished without disturbing native plants, and communication systems that allowed learning without disrupting daily life. By the end of their visit, the Council of Zalaris formally acknowledged the success of the projects. They did not abandon their laws entirely. Rather, they adjusted them to accommodate controlled collaboration. Citizens of Zalaris, who had never imagined change possible, were now actively participating in interplanetary projects. The galaxy had achieved what once seemed impossible. The oldest, most rigid systems were beginning to cooperate voluntarily, guided by example and understanding. Ilara and Myra's influence extended beyond practical inventions. They inspired a philosophical shift across worlds. Leaders began to value empathy and collaboration as essential qualities of governance. Communities understood that sharing knowledge, energy, and resources was not a threat, but a chance to thrive together. Children were taught the principles of unity and curiosity, ensuring that future generations would continue the work of connection without coercion. In private moments, the princesses reflected on their journey. Ilara adjusted her star-mapping device, while Myra tended to a floating garden of Verdante's plants adapted to Lunara's atmosphere. "Do you remember when we first touched the artifact?" Ilara asked softly. "I never imagined it could lead to this." Myra smiled, brushing her hand over a glowing vine. "I know, and yet it was not the artifact alone. It was us, our choices, and our willingness to imagine differently. The galaxy changed because we dared to believe it could." The artifact, now returned to the stars, had served its purpose. Its light shimmered in the distance, a reminder of what was possible when courage, curiosity, and cooperation were combined. The princesses no longer needed it to guide them. The lessons it had instilled were firmly rooted in their minds and hearts. As the years passed, more planets joined the network of cooperation. Science, art, and culture flourished. Energy crises became rare, environmental restoration succeeded across multiple systems, and communication and understanding between species grew stronger. Conflicts that had once seemed inevitable were avoided through dialogue, empathy, and shared purpose. The galaxy was no longer fragmented, but alive with collaboration and learning. Ilara and Myra were no longer just princesses. They were leaders in the truest sense, leaders who inspired rather than commanded, who showed the way rather than forcing it. They traveled less frequently in later years, focusing instead on mentoring young leaders, overseeing new projects, and ensuring that the principles of cooperation continued to spread naturally. The galaxy, they realized, had become self-sustaining in its unity. In a quiet moment, the two princesses stood on a platform above Lunara's crystal city, looking at the stars and planets connected by threads of energy, communication, and life. "The galaxy is humming," Myra said, her eyes reflecting distant suns. "It feels alive, doesn't it?" Ilara nodded. Yes, and it's because we chose to act with care, with curiosity, and with hope. Even the oldest laws adapted because we respected them while showing their true purpose. The legend of Princess Alara and Princess Myra spread across the stars. They were celebrated not for conquest or power, but for vision, empathy, and courage. Stories told of two young women who united worlds, not through force, but through ideas, kindness, and the daring belief that the galaxy could be more than the sum of its rules. And so, a new era began. Planets that had once been isolated were now part of a thriving, interconnected community. The oldest galactic laws were no longer strict chains, but living guides, flexible and adaptive, capable of supporting unity rather than division. The galaxy itself seemed to hum with possibility, a universe transformed by two princesses who dared to imagine differently. Alara and Myra knew their work was far from over. The galaxy was vast, and the threads of connection could always expand further. Yet they also knew that they had achieved something extraordinary. They had shown that change could be gentle, that laws could bend without breaking, and that cooperation, curiosity, and empathy could reshape entire worlds. As the stars twinkled above and planets thrived below, the two princesses stood together, smiling, knowing that even the oldest laws could adapt when guided by courage, creativity, and hope. And in that moment, the galaxy itself seemed to promise that unity, kindness, and imagination would always have a place among the stars. When two princesses united, even the oldest galactic laws began to break.